Now to an incredible find overseas, an elaborate series of stone monuments believed to have been hidden for thousands of years, not far from the famous site of Stonehenge.
In 2024, a piece of rock that had sat at the center of Stonehenge for 5,000 years was quietly declared a scientific impossibility. Not because it moved and not because it spoke, but because geochemists finally figured out where it came from, and the answer broke the map everyone had trusted for a century. Picture Salisbury Plain in southern England, flat and wind-scoured, chalk grass rolling out toward a horizon with nothing on it, except one dense ring of standing stone that refuses to make sense in that empty landscape. Stonehenge doesn't look like it belongs there. It never has. That's the first thing anyone notices when they stand in front of it, and it's the first thing that turns out to be true in a much deeper way than tourists usually realize. At the heart of the monument lies a flat, 6-ton slab known as the altar stone. It's not a sarsen, those enormous sandstone giants that make up the outer ring, and for over 100 years, geologists assumed it was simply an oversized bluestone, hauled from the same general region of Wales as the smaller stones inside the circle. That assumption held for generations. Textbooks repeated it, museum placards repeated it, and nobody had strong enough tools to challenge it. Then, in August 2024, a research team led by Anthony Clark, a PhD researcher at Curtin University in Australia, working alongside Professor Chris Kirkland and colleagues from Aberystwyth University and University College London, published a study in the journal Nature that appended the story completely. Using precise isotopic and mineral dating on tiny grains of zircon, apatite, and rutile embedded in fragments of the altar stone, the team traced its chemical fingerprint and found it didn't match Wales at all. It matched the Arcadian Basin, a geological region stretching across northeastern Scotland, more than 400 miles from Salisbury Plain. 400 miles. Not by a shortcut, not by a modern road, but across some of the most difficult terrain in Britain, using nothing but the tools and transport of the late Neolithic period, roughly 5,000 years ago. Dr. Richard Bevans, one of the geologists on the project who has spent decades identifying the specific quarries the bluestones came from in the Preseli Hills, called the altar stone finding one of the most significant discoveries in the monument's modern research history. It rewired 100 years of assumptions in the space of one careful lab analysis. That's the part worth sitting with before anything else. This wasn't an AI dreaming up hidden acoustics or secret star charts. This was slow, rigorous isotope geochemistry, years of grinding down microscopic mineral grains and comparing their age signatures against known geological provinces across the entire British Isles, arriving at a conclusion nobody expected and few wanted to believe at first. And once the data held up under repeated testing, the implications rippled out far beyond one stone. If a 6-ton slab of rock made the journey from northern Scotland to southern England in the Neolithic era, then whatever network of contact, trade, or shared ritual culture existed across ancient Britain was vastly larger and more organized than most archaeologists had assumed. This wasn't a scattering of isolated farming communities each doing their own thing. This looks like evidence of long-distance connection, coordinated effort, and shared symbolic purpose stretching the length of the island, at a time when we like to imagine people barely left their own valley. Which brings us to the sarsens, the giant uprights and lintels that most people picture when they hear the word Stonehenge. In 2020, a study published in Science Advances by Professor David Nash of the University of Brighton, using portable X-ray fluorescence combined with detailed geochemical analysis, traced the chemical signature of the sarsen stones to a specific wooded area called West Woods, roughly 15 miles north of the monument, near Marlborough. 20 of the 29 surviving sarsens matched that single source almost perfectly, meaning the builders weren't simply grabbing the nearest available boulders. They were selecting from one specific location, likely because of a known quality or reputation tied to that stone, and hauling pieces weighing over 20 tons across rolling chalk downland using little more than timber, rope, and raw human coordination. Then there are the bluestones, smaller than the sarsens, but still weighing up to several tons apiece, and traced with remarkable precision to outcrops in the Preseli Hills of West Wales, roughly 140 miles away. Geologists including Dr. Rob Ixer and Dr. Bevans have spent years narrowing down the exact quarry sites, identifying outcrops such as Craig Rose Y Phelan where quarrying marks and extraction points still survive in the rock. That distance alone raised the same question for decades. Why haul stone that far when suitable rock existed so much closer to Salisbury Plain? Professor Mike Parker Pearson of University College London, who has led major excavation projects at Stonehenge for over 2 decades, has argued that the bluestones may have originally stood as a monument in Wales itself before being dismantled and transported to their current location. Meaning some of these stones may have been sacred, meaningful, or symbolically loaded well before they ever reached the plane we associate them with today. None of this required aliens, giants, or a machine intelligence whispering secrets nobody else could hear. It required patient fieldwork, careful lab chemistry, and researchers willing to question assumptions that had gone unchallenged simply because nobody had the tools to test them properly until now. And that's arguably the more unsettling realization: the mystery was never solved by ignoring science. It was deepened by science doing exactly what it's supposed to do, and still landing on an answer that stretches belief. Now consider the acoustics, because this is where fact and embellishment tend to blur the most in popular retellings, and it's worth being precise about what's actually been studied. In 2011 and 2012, a genuine academic project led by Professor Rupert Till of the University of Huddersfield, working with acoustic engineer Bruno Fazenda of the University of Salford, conducted real acoustic modeling on Stonehenge using a full-scale concrete replica of the monument located in Maryhill, Washington State. Built as a war memorial in the early 20th century, and structurally similar to the original layout. Their research found that the enclosed circle of stones did meaningfully alter sound, creating echo, reverberation, and resonance effects distinct from an open field, consistent with a space that would have felt acoustically different, more contained, more charged, than the empty plain surrounding it. Their published findings describe measurable acoustic enhancement, particularly for percussive and vocal sound, of the kind that could plausibly have shaped ritual or ceremonial use. But, and this distinction matters, their research did not claim the monument was engineered to produce dangerous infrasound frequencies capable of inducing hallucinations, nor did it claim any specific mind-altering technology was built into the stone placement. That version of the story is a dramatic extrapolation that circulates widely online but isn't supported by the peer-reviewed acoustic research itself. What the real study does support is something quieter, but still striking, that whoever built this monument may have understood, on some intuitive or experiential level, that enclosed stone architecture changes how sound behaves and shaped their sacred space accordingly. That's not proof of secret weaponized frequencies. It's evidence of a builder who paid attention to the sensory experience of the people standing inside their creation. The astronomical alignment is where the science is oldest and most solid of all. The famous solstice alignment, where the rising sun on the summer solstice lines up with the heel stone and the avenue leading into the circle, has been documented and studied since the work of Norman Lockyer in the early 20th century, and later refined by researchers using precise modern surveying. Professor Timothy Darville of Bournemouth University, who has led extensive excavation and dating work at the site, has written extensively about the monument's dual solstice orientation, noting that the axis works in both directions, toward the midsummer sunrise and equally toward the midwinter sunset, suggesting the builders cared as much, or more, about the depth of winter as the height of summer. That detail alone reframes the popular image of Stonehenge as a monument built purely to celebrate the sun's return. It may just as easily have been built to mark the darkest, most anxious point of the year, when ancient communities needed reassurance that the light would come back at all. The Aubrey holes, that ring of 56 pits inside the earthwork, first identified by the 17th-century antiquarian John Aubrey, remain genuinely debated among archaeologists. Some researchers have proposed they once held timber posts or small standing stones. Others have suggested they may relate to lunar observation cycles, since 56 divides cleanly by the roughly 18.6-year lunar nodal cycle. But it's important to say plainly that this lunar interpretation remains a hypothesis, discussed cautiously in academic literature, not a confirmed mathematical proof etched into the landscape. Excavations by Parker Pearson's team have found cremated human remains associated with several of the holes, reinforcing the idea that this space served as an early cemetery, layered with meaning long before the great sarsens were ever raised. And that phased construction is itself remarkable. Radiocarbon dating places the earliest earthwork and ditch around 3000 BCE, the timber and early stone settings not long after, the towering sarsen circle and trilithons around 2500 BCE, and continued rearrangement of the bluestones for centuries after that. meaning Stonehenge wasn't a single construction event but a project that spanned roughly 1,500 years, passed down across dozens of generations, each one inheriting a landscape already thick with meaning and adding to it rather than starting fresh. Nobody who broke ground on the first ditch ever saw the finished sarsen circle. Whatever vision drove this monument outlived every single person who might have originally conceived it. By around 1600 BCE, active use and modification of the site appears to have wound down. There's no evidence of catastrophe, no sign of violent abandonment, simply a gradual falling away of the ceremonial activity that had defined the landscape for a millennium and a half, as Bronze Age society shifted its focus elsewhere. That, too, is something worth sitting with. A monument built with such enormous, sustained, cross-generational effort was eventually just let go. Not destroyed. Not erased. Just quietly set down by people who had other concerns, leaving the stones to stand in that empty field for the next 36 centuries, waiting for isotope geochemistry, portable X-ray spectrometers, and careful excavation to finally start asking it the right questions. So where does that leave the actual mystery, the real one, without embellishment? It leaves us with a monument built by people who coordinated stone transport across hundreds of miles of difficult terrain using nothing but rope, timber, and cooperative labor, who selected specific quarries for specific stones rather than using whatever was nearby, who oriented their entire structure along a precise solar axis that still works exactly as designed 5,000 years later, and who, according to the most current geochemical evidence, may have imported ceremonial material from a source population living the length of the British Isles away. That is already a strange, humbling story, one that keeps getting stranger every time a new lab technique is pointed at these stones. We don't need invented AI oracles or fabricated infrasound weapons to feel the weight of what these people accomplished. The real evidence, painstakingly gathered by geologists, archaeologists, and acoustic researchers over decades, does that on its own. It tells us that Neolithic Britain was more connected, more deliberate,